What's up everybody, how's it going? It's Burke, aka Danzweight here, and welcome to another Final Fantasy attack-only adventure on the channel. This was a journey that I started a while back, and I have had a lot of fun going through different Final Fantasy games and seeing if you can beat them by only using the attack command. And it's resulted in some of the most fun challenges that I have done so far on this channel. And so yes, there are basically infinite other challenges that I could be doing right now, but right now I'm already trying to work my way through the very difficult and challenging Final Fantasy X Masters mod, and I have the randomizer livestream stuff going, and so I thought in terms of my kind of challenge material of this type, I just couldn't help but continue with attack only. Also because in recent times I have had a bit of an itch to play Final Fantasy XII once again. And so as a result, here we are once again back at it with attack only, and this time I am going to be taking on Final Fantasy XII, the Zodiac Age. For anyone that's been following these attack only challenges, it has been a little while, but I wanted to take a little break from it and focus on other content and really come back when I was ready instead of pumping out as much content as possible just for the sake of it. So thank you for your patience, and as always I would really appreciate it if, especially for this first episode, you could drop a like and show the video a lot of love so that we can get this series off to a good start, because you guys have been consistently very supportive and helpful with series like this. And since this one is the single series on the channel that takes me the most time to make per episode, it's the one that needs the most love to make it worth the time. So I would definitely appreciate it for this one as well. So without much further ado, let's get into it and start talking about Final Fantasy XII, the Zodiac Age, attack only. Okay, my friends, it is time for background and introduction, so buckle up because as always there is a lot to talk about. First of all, one of the reasons I wanted to even come back to this game is because I haven't played it in such a long time. My only experience playing through Final Fantasy XII as of this point was when I played through the Zodiac Age for the first time in the summer of 2017. Now, overall, I am a fan of Final Fantasy XII. I think it's a good game with some truly great aspects to it that I'm sure we'll generally cover as I continue to do this challenge. But it's a game I never really wanted to revisit because I think at its core, I never truly connected with the story and the party as a whole and like the whole experience on that front. But if there's one thing that Final Fantasy XII offers, which is one of the best and a little bit different of course from some of the other Final Fantasies, is its battle system and its world. And so eventually I had a feeling that I wanted to see how this gambit system and the gameplay system of Final Fantasy XII would work for a challenge like this. Final Fantasy XII is one I feel like maybe the battle system's kind of different enough and designed with a different kind of mentality in mind compared to its predecessors, that trying to do something like attack only might be way more difficult or potentially way more easy. And as you guys know with this challenge, when I start these off, I don't know what's going to happen at the end of them. So as of recording this, I've played maybe 5 or 6 hours, and I'm still very kind of early into the game, but I have enough content to at least make this first episode. So if it is the case that, say, by 10, 15, 20 hours in, I get completely stuck, and I have to basically end the attack-only challenge, then that's how long the series will be. But if I can continue all the way through, and complete the story and do some optional stuff too, then it's going to be a longer series with more episodes. I've generally been enjoying trying to keep things to, say, 8 episodes or so as much as I can. One of the reasons I left Final Fantasy XII for a bit later is because I know it's quite a big game, and I was a bit worried that I just wouldn't be able to do it without skipping a lot of content to try and keep it towards that sort of 8 episode kind of range. We'll see how it goes. For this first episode, I'm just going to take my time, talk through everything and show you guys as much as I can, and then we'll generally see how the pacing is going. And for this one in particular, I might have to cut out a little bit more than usual to kind of keep the pacing on point and not have this be like a 15-20 episode series. So we'll see how that goes. So that's another reason why Final Fantasy XII was compelling to me, because it's a game that I don't know very well at all, and I have forgotten so much about it. Like now and then Final Fantasy XII comes up in conversation, and especially when you're talking about like gameplay and that kind of thing, there's so much of it that I've just completely forgotten at this point. And I thought it'd be nice to kind of go back and sort of re-educate myself, but also see if I can get through this challenge while being someone who really doesn't know the game very well. And so my approach was to try and do some preliminary research, because obviously with my attack-only experience at this point, there's certain elements that I know will be important to me, no pun intended, And so I spent some time trying to figure out, like, in this game, how do you sort of get certain things to happen as part of an attack only. So some preliminary research, but outside of that, it's going to be kind of going with the flow. I have my jagged guide kind of alongside as I'm playing, just so that I don't miss anything too crucial. But it's going to be very much a kind of free-form, freestyle, not like a super kind of knowledgeable playthrough. And if that results in me getting stuck and having a lot of problems, then we're going to kind of work backwards and see if we can figure it out after hitting a sticking point. So I assume what you're going to see here is a pretty noobish run, and you're going to see me try to get through like that. And if maybe I end up getting stuck, then it's going to be something that's going to cause me to do more research, learn the game better, understand certain mechanics better, and then hopefully get better at the game or learn more about the game and make my way through this challenge. So that's generally how it's going to work. You guys should be familiar with the format by now. That's generally going to continue. And so with that, we can actually start to see some gameplay here, and I'll continue to explain how things are working as we make our way forward. Okay then, so the game starts off with Rex and Barsh, and this is obviously very, very much a tutorial bit here, but it gives me a chance to start talking about the Zodiac Age specifically, and what I plan to do with it in terms of the attack-only run. Now, again, this isn't an area of the game that I research too much. The Zodiac Age is the one that I own, it's the one that I have on Steam, and where possible I always try to play these games on PC, because they generally just tend to run better, they're easier to record, and also for the purposes of doing these experimental type of challenge runs, they're also easier for me to hack and manipulate if something needs to be done, like a serious farm or something like that, where I can save myself a ton of time and continue to bring you guys these episodes instead of taking a huge amount of time farming on a console or something like that. So this is the Steam version of the Zodiac Age, and thankfully it has things like a built-in speed up, which is really nice, of course. Anytime that's available, I will be trying to utilize it to make the experience as quick and smooth as possible. But one thing that I think the Zodiac Age was generally a little bit criticized for by fans of the OG is the fact that you can choose 2 license boards per character, and so I believe fundamentally the Zodiac Age is easier than the original and the International Zodiac job system that came before it. And so thinking ahead, I was like, are there any sort of extra restrictions that I can place? Because in my attack-only adventures so far, there have been games where I've tried to put some extra restrictions on there to try to keep things a little bit more interesting and fair. And so for this one, my initial reaction was maybe I should just do 1 job per character. 1 license board, 1 job, and we're not allowed to change it. And so I thought that would at least balance the books a little bit more and make things a bit more interesting and make my choices about which jobs to use all the more important. So moving forward, that's one thing we're going to do. We're going to only pick 1 job per party member, and we're not going to change it. And when we have the ability to basically have a second, we're not going to use it unless we hit a massive sticking point and it feels impossible to continue without selecting the second job. So we'll see how it goes, but for now we're only working with 1 per character. In terms of how the gameplay will work, there's multiple options here. It's attack only, and so of course I can just basically manually input attack. And the good thing about this game is once you've manually selected to attack an enemy, your character will just continue to repeat the action that you last chose. And so if you're doing attack only, you only need to input the attack command 1 time, and your character will continue to attack and do nothing else until either the character is dead or the enemy that you're attacking is dead. So that's kind of just useful from a quality of life standpoint. I don't have to continually keep mashing X to get things to work. And the other layer to this, of course, is going to be those gambits, because that's what Final Fantasy XII and its gameplay is famous for. Now, obviously, the point of gambits is to essentially kind of program your own character, and if you have your gambit set up really nicely, it turns into more of an auto battle kind of situation where you can kind of almost handle any situation that comes at you, and your character, if they have the right gambit set up, will do the right thing at the right time and basically win you the battle. But we're doing attack only. So obviously any gambits that you would normally set up to heal yourself, for example, in battle, I can't do that, because fundamentally the rule will always remain the same. When I'm engaging in combat with an enemy, I can only use the attack command. And so for that reason, gambits themselves, so far at least, I don't think are going to be that particularly important. We'll get to like what we can do with attack only plus gambits as we continue through the game, because it's not the case that as a result, we never use gambits. I'm still going to be using gambits. But obviously, a huge proportion of what gambits can do are going to be kind of useless for us because we can only attack in the challenge. So we'll see how that goes as we continue forward. But for now, obviously, you're seeing in the background a bit of kind of Rex doing his tutorial stuff. And in general, it's pretty easy. What I wanted to do also to start the challenge was to basically start with the most absolute hardcore variant that I could think of, which was to also not heal outside of battles. The only way you would heal under that circumstance would be if you get to a save crystal, and that replenishes your HP and MP. Now, this one was never going to be that realistic to do, but it's like, hey, let's just start the game like this and see how far we can get. And so I think for the first couple of hours or something, I managed to power through without using that, but eventually I kind of gave up on that, and I decided to keep it the same way I'd basically kept my other attack-only runs, where outside of battle, I'm allowing myself to at least use items to heal. So no magic, I'm trying to avoid magic outside of battle, but I decided that making item usage outside of battle once again is fair game. So that's how we're going to do it for this run for now. Battles will be truly attack only, and outside of battles we're going to be using the save crystals and items to heal. The reason I like doing the whole using items to heal is because it also adds an element of sort of resource management. How many items do you even need to survive through an area? Do you have enough gil to buy these items? And are there going to be any points in the game where items are disabled or they're going to be an issue? Those are the kind of things I kind of enjoy finding out in these challenges as well. And so that's why we're going to run it through with that kind of setup first. And we'll see how far that takes us and how it's going to affect inventory and resource management. So now with Rex, there is going to be a small section here where he is 3-on-1. And this brings me nicely to another aspect of this challenge. One thing that I wasn't too sure about was, to what extent can you actually kind of avoid encounters? At the end of the day, you have quite a lot of free movement here to kind of run around during a battle. But all of that said, it's not like this is an action game where you can actively sort of time something to parry a move or dodge a move or something like that. But you can still run away from enemies. And so I was thinking to myself, like, to what extent can you do some kind of like, you jab an enemy, then you try to run away, and then you sort of basically avoid being hit just because you're running away. And it's something I generally continue to experiment with for a lot of what I've played so far. But in general, I think the way that the game is structured is that obviously they don't want you to be able to just purely like run away from an enemy, like create distance and avoid all attacks just because you created distance. So you'll see a lot of enemies where, for example, I'll attack, then I'll try to basically run away from that enemy, but the enemy will always chase you down, and even if they're not next to you, they'll kind of do a physical attack and you'll still take damage. So this idea of basically trying to physically just run away from enemies while in the fight, try to get them to miss their hit basically and then come back and hit them, it doesn't really work very well. I don't think the game's designed well for that, but it's the kind of thing that I'll continue to dabble in and experiment with as we go on. And it's also an area where jobs will play a role, and we'll talk about that in a bit as well. And before long, it is time for Vaughn, and he has to take out these sewer rats in Rabanasta, and you can already see that 2-hit KO, in general, that means you're in a good place. We've done a lot of attack only at this point, and if your character can take out an enemy in a couple of hits, then you're likely going to be pretty safe. So we kind of get the job done with Vaughn here, and we begin our time in Rabanasta. So, as I say, the game is big, there's a lot of dialogue, there's a lot of big towns, there's a lot of exploration to do, and so as always with these things, I'm going to be editing out a lot of things. We are going to be focusing on the battles themselves, and any kind of setup and preparations that I need for specific battles that I think is worth mentioning. So we're going to move it along here, and of course, in order to get things rolling, the first thing we do is we take on the Rogue Tomato Hunt. And already we get our first piece of equipment. Of course, equipment is going to play a role here. So this is a section of the game where you get your first piece of equipment. They tell you about the license boards and all of that business. So this is the area that I mentioned where I did some preliminary research. And it tends to be the case that there's two main things that can kind of influence the outcome of an attack-only challenge, because we have incredibly limited options attackingly. But what we can do, where possible, depending on the game, is infuse our attacks with status ailments to at least do something extra, and we can also try to infuse them with elements. And on the flip side, we have to try and protect against those two things. So obviously one of the first things I did before starting this was to have a look at my situation when it came to how can I afflict statuses and elemental damage, and can I protect from them. So I had a big look at all of the equipment in the game, and had a look at any kind of passive abilities they have, any elemental options that I have, and I made a big list of basically all of the possibilities, and that would help me kind of make some decisions moving forward about what I could use. Because when your options are that limited, making use of status effects and elements is going to of course be very useful. Even if it sometimes comes at the expense of attack power, so if a character's weaker or has less HP as a result of picking a job that, for example, can use elemental arrows, I feel like sometimes it might be a better option. And so that's the kind of research that I did. And of course, depending on which job you choose, you will be able to unlock certain options quicker than others and gain access to options that the others cannot. Okay, so after running around in Rabanastre and getting a little bit of early gil by selling the package that I was supposed to deliver to somebody, which is a completely optional thing, I decided to have a look at my licenses, finally. So I made a list of jobs that I thought might be useful for this particular challenge, and as I say, I am very far from an expert in this game, so if you're trying to do this yourself, don't take my word for it, but this is what I'm going to be working with, and we'll see how well it works for me. Perhaps you can learn from my mistakes and do it differently for your own run. But the jobs that I had in mind were Shikari, Machinist, Monk, Time Mage, Archer, and Foebreaker. So those were my kind of initial set that I had, and of these, I decided to go for Shikari first. So I'll talk about each job like after I have them. I'm not going to run through all of them now. That's going to be kind of too much time waste. But I decided to go for Shikari first. I feel like it would suit Vaughn. I feel like he's kind of built as a Shikari, personally. And for these guys, the reason I wanted to have them is because they have weapons that can deal status effects. And these are going to be obviously very useful under certain circumstances. So a quick example, very early on, a Shikari can equip a Mage Masher, which has a chance of inflicting silence on an enemy. So if you're facing, let's say, a mage type enemy that's very resistant to physical attacks, and you're going to be hit with a lot of magic, but they're susceptible to silence, that's obviously going to make a huge difference. And since I can't cast anything, any weapons and equipment that I have that can afflict these statuses and or do elemental damage is going to be very useful. So I decided to get Vaughn onto the whole Shikari thing. Interestingly enough, later on he also gains access to some longer range weapons potentially, and obviously one thing that could be very useful in this challenge is being able to space out from an enemy and have certain attackers kind of take the pressure from the enemies and have the longer range party members deal damage while being safe from being hit themselves. And so I figured any job that has range could inherently be useful to me in this particular challenge, because there's definitely some AoE stuff that ranged attackers can avoid by default. And so the Shikari can potentially get some guns later on that could help. Another benefit, I figured, they have access to some swiftness, which can of course make them deal more damage more quickly, which is something that we always want. And they have pretty decent HP as well. And so early on, without trying to overthink things on a too crazy level, I thought let's just set Vaughn off as a Shikari. Over the next 4 to 6 hours, we're going to get plenty of new party members anyway, and hopefully we should start to get a bit of a spread of abilities once we get people involved. And so that's what I did. I went with Shikari for Vaughn first, and with that I set out for the first time into the sands to try and find the Rogue Tomato. Alright, here we go. Vaughn, 127 HP here, and he's all by himself. So obviously the first kind of thing was to try to not trigger too many random encounters. That was another interesting element of this entire playthrough. It was basically how a random encounter is going to work. To what extent can you basically avoid as many of them as you want, and how dangerous are they if you get sucked into them? And so already, seeing as Vaughn was by himself, I had no intention of trying to get myself into any trouble here, and so I was basically already immediately starting to kind of experiment a little bit with like which enemies can I go close to. So for example, this little cactus guy here, he has, you can tell from the color of his HP bar that he's not too much of a problem. He won't attack you unless you attack him first. And so I can kind of just run around those guys. And you're also seeing treasure chests in this game. And so now, as I continue to explore the Estesan for the first time, let's actually talk about chests, because the chests work quite differently in this game to how they've worked in all of the attack onlys that I've done so far. And in the Zodiac Age, they also work a bit differently to the OG. So what I found was this GameFAQs post that kind of tries to break down what the deal is with these treasure chests. So I'm going to read some of it to you guys because I don't have an in-depth knowledge of how it works, but I think it's good to give at least a little bit of context for what to expect, as I try to kind of experiment with avoiding encounters here, as you can see. But I will get sucked into one shortly, so I'll kind of let this play in the background as I explain how chests work, hopefully. I am going by a post on GameFAQs here that seems credible to me, but might not be 100% accurate, but they've said those chests that do appear will always appear in the same place. They've also said some chests appear 100% of the time that you enter an area, implying that some of them do not. So some chests will always be there 100% of the time. Each one of these types of chests always contains the same treasure, and most will not reappear after they have opened. So basically, if you open a chest and it has like a piece of equipment in there, or like it has something genuinely like quite good or useful, chances are that chest is a one-off and they won't have that same thing in there again in the future. Then they go on to say most chests only appear or spawn sometimes. These chests can reappear if you go one screen away and then return. The contents of these chests will vary, but will always be from the same list of possible treasures. For example, a given chest might contain gil, a potion, or a golden staff, but it will never contain anything else except one of these three items. Then they say, be aware that since most chests can only contain one of 3 or so items, the chance that you will actually get what you are seeking from a chest that appears, for example, 75% of the time, is considerably less than 75%. And so the chances of getting what you want from a chest are kind of twofold. There's the chance of the chest appearing in the first place, which may not be anywhere near 100%, and then there's the chance of finding what you want from within that chest out of the pool of items that's in there. So it's a little bit more complicated, obviously, than normal chests, and that's why, for now at least, I didn't overthink it too much. I was just going and picking up whatever chest I saw and kind of hoping for the best. And so I wasn't doing any kind of like, oh, this chest is supposed to have this in it, but there's a 10% chance, so I have to keep exiting and re-entering and keep farming this chest until I get what I need. I wasn't doing that type of optimization at this stage. It was just kind of open the chest, see what's in there, and move on. But it's definitely something that's exploitable, because you're seeing already that I can get things like potions from chests. And so if you leave an area and keep coming back, you can basically just spend time farming for potions without having to pay for them. And that's definitely something where if I start to struggle with resource management and I don't have the gil to buy the items I need to kind of keep my health up during a dungeon, I might be inclined to basically spend some time farming chests in order to improve my inventory stock. And so that's the general idea with these chests. Now, one thing that I discussed with my friend Indubitable Wordsmith that you might have seen on the channel, you might see him in the comments for this particular series as well. He's my kind of resident Final Fantasy XII expert friend that I talk to regularly, and I did have a chat with him, of course, before I began recording for this one. And while we were talking about like what we could do and potential other restrictions and stuff, he said it might be a nice idea to basically kind of not allow yourself to get any of the quote-unquote invisible weapons. Invisible weapons are basically incredibly OP weapons that the game has, and if you get these, they can really alter your chances of being successful in the run. And since I'm trying to avoid being completely OP where possible to keep things interesting, I'm going to be avoiding those invisible weapons as well. It might be the case that for a certain fight I feel like I absolutely need them to even succeed, then obviously we'll go for it. But for now at least, I'm treating those as kind of not in the game. And as I say, when it comes to treasure chests, we're kind of just picking up whatever's there, whatever I find, and just moving along instead of deliberately trying to farm for chests. So that's the information I think you need for now on chests. If there's going to be anything more to it, then I'll definitely talk about it. And there's probably going to be times where you see me kind of playing in the background, traversing an area. There might be chests that I miss, or there might be a chest that had something good in it, but I got the worse option, I never went back to it. For now at least, we'll just ignore those and we'll keep rolling until we run into any serious issues, and then we'll work backwards. So you saw in the background there, I managed to slay the rogue tomato, no problems at all. Don't need anything fancy for that, and with that I can return to Rabanasta and basically continue the story. In terms of the hunts, I wasn't really sure how many of them I wanted to do, when I wanted to do them, but in general I think the idea for me was to try and pick up the hunts, like accept them, and talk to the person giving you the hunt, And then if I come across it in the story, or if I'm just exploring around and I happen to be able to defeat it, then sure. But as of this point, I don't have like a particular need to do all of the hunts. But of course they can offer good rewards and potentially some interesting battles. But I figure the game and the story is generally big enough as it is, and so I don't have a specific focus on trying to do all of the hunts at this point. But you will see me do some of them for sure as we continue forward, and I'll kind of see how I feel the deeper I get into the game when it comes to the hunts. As has always been the case in these attack-only playthroughs, my priority for now is to make progress and to not farm and to become OP. What I noticed pretty early on is that it's actually pretty easy to just become incredibly OP very early in this game. So you saw me in the Esther Sand, and I could basically beat anything one-on-one pretty easily there. And I can obviously farm for experience, I can farm for license points, and I could literally just spend hours in there on speed up mode and farm myself hundreds of LP points and increase my experience. I think when party members join your team, they also basically are like an average of your own party's level, and so they come in at a higher level for free. And so if you really want to, I feel like this is the type of game in which you can exploit that really hardcore and gain yourself a huge advantage. But for me, once again, I didn't deliberately kind of spend a huge amount of time farming or upping my levels or anything like that. There's already been a couple of times where I felt like I was a little bit underpowered, so I upped my levels by like 1 or 2 to try and defeat a boss. But in general, my kind of philosophy is the same as it always is. If we get stuck and we find that we're not powerful enough, then we go back and we farm, get stronger, come back and try it again, and see if we can win second time round. So that's how I'll continue to treat this one. But it does seem to me like Final Fantasy XII in particular, it seems to allow you a lot of opportunity to kind of get OP very quickly. I think more so with the license boards, because obviously the experience requirements per level will go up. And so when you're fighting kind of things that give you very minimal experience, it's not going to help too much after you've gone up like 5 or 10 levels. But I feel like the license points, given how quickly you can kill enemies, even one license point, it doesn't seem kind of too bad. And so it's definitely something you could spam if you really wanted to later on. And so we're finally starting to put everything into place. It's already been like probably half an hour or longer since I've started discussing things. But as you know, these first episodes are kind of how it always goes. But at least for now, it's looking promising. Varna's already taken out his first hunt, and we'll soon have another party member joining us, and we'll see how things go from there. And so after speaking to Old Man Dallin, we get to go to the Giza Plains, and we need to make it towards Penello. And so here, I figured that the enemies might be a little bit stronger, and so for now at least, my intention wasn't really to fight anything at this point. I just wanted to see if I could get through without triggering any encounters. So you can see me kind of slowly, methodically scan around, see if there's any treasure chests, try to definitely grab those, the extra inventory. And you saw again there, I kind of pressed X too quickly. I'm still just not used to that. But they are relatively generous with when enemies start to attack you, so I'm kind of just walking around, kind of weighing things up here, seeing if I trigger a fight. But you see there, just utilizing fleeing mode as well where possible. And so it doesn't seem too bad. In these more open areas, avoiding encounters seems relatively easy. But as you will see a little bit later on, once you actually head into internal dungeons, things look very different. And it seems pretty difficult to get through without fighting enemies. And so a few minutes later, Penello joins the party, and I already have another decision to make. Now, this one wasn't super easy for me because Penello, like, I'm not the biggest fan of Penello as a character, and even though this is a purely kind of experimental, mechanical kind of challenge where you're supposed to just beat the game under these conditions by any means necessary, I still kind of wanted to do it my way, kind of do it with my favorite characters and all of that kind of stuff where possible. And so I wasn't sure how much of a role Penello would play, but I still needed to give her a job that would be, I think, at least a little bit useful to this challenge. And so I wasn't sure if I wanted to give her the machinist role. The machinist I felt like might be one of the ones that could be the most useful in this challenge. And so even though she's the second character, I didn't want to give her what might be potentially one of the most useful jobs early on. But I didn't want to completely kind of throw it away because I might need her to win some of the earlier battles. And she might actually end up being more useful than I thought. So I kind of had to find something in the middle ground where I thought it could be useful, but not potentially some of the most powerful ones that I have on offer. So I spent a little bit of time deciding on what to do about Penello, and ultimately I decided to give her the Time Mage one, because basically I still leant more towards let me give her something useful, because by the time I get a full enough party, I might already run into issues. And so I thought, let me give her something more powerful to start with, and then we'll kind of see how we go from there. So for anyone wondering, the Time Mage I felt might be useful to me because they have access to crossbows, and by extension they have access to bolts. And once again, bolts are able to afflict status ailments. And so having a ranged attacker that can deliver statuses to enemies, I felt surely in an attack-only challenge could be very useful. And so that's why I went for Time Mage. Another one, they can equip heavy armor, so there might be some fights in which we need to be a bit tankier. And there are some heavy armors that might be able to offer benefits that their lighter counterparts cannot. And so heavy armor might be useful. They have access to a weapon called the Deathbringer later on. I don't know when you even get this or if it could be useful, but I kind of noted it down because it was in my big list of weapons that do status damage. And of course, it carries a 10% chance of KOing an enemy. So not sure if and when I'll ever get it, but the fact that it's theoretically possible, I think, for a Time Mage to equip a Deathbringer, I thought that's still potentially a plus point somewhere down the line. And of course, fundamentally, they have range because they use crossbows, and I thought at this early stage that's good enough for me. Let's make Penelo a Time Mage. And so that's exactly what I did. And so what we have so far is a Shikari and a Time Battle Mage. And so now I'm back out in the sands, and I have Vaan and Penelo. We're at level 2 as a Shikari and as a Battle Mage. So at this point, I don't really have anything to equip on Penelo, and I'm still kind of unsure exactly what to spend my gil on. But I knew that at this very early stage, it probably wasn't super important, so we're just going to kind of head out there and see how we go. And so for now, at least, I decided to not kind of complicate anything with gambits right now. Like, I didn't want anyone doing anything that I couldn't control. And so this was kind of full control freak mode, where I'm doing everything completely manually. This isn't going to remain, but at this stage, I'm still kind of just learning how it works when you have another party member. One of my biggest fears basically was that if I don't do everything manually and I don't have things set up properly, that my party members are going to trigger encounters that I don't want to trigger and get me into trouble, or they're going to attack enemies that I haven't kind of targeted yet. They're going to attack something that I'm not currently targeting. And so you can set all of those up with gambits anyway, but for now at least I kind of wanted to just do everything completely manually just to get more of a feel for how these battles are playing out with multiple characters. But you can see, I mean, Vaan and Penelo, the two of them together, at least for these like regular wolf enemies, there's no trouble. They're taking them out pretty quickly. So eventually, hopefully, we will get some kind of crossbow for our Time Battle Mage, but she doesn't stay in the party for very long anyway. And so for now, at least, she's a very temporary party member that just has a dagger of her own. But even that's enough to deal with these very, very early enemies. Like, no problems here. And you can see there, the Shikari now and then is blocking some moves as well. That's the type of mechanics I'm definitely curious about later on. Like, how do you increase the chance of your blocking? How do you increase the chance of getting chains? We're going to look into that kind of stuff again if and when it starts to become more necessary. But for now, at least, we're just keeping it very simple. We're just attacking enemies using attack only, completely manual, and just taking them out and trying to explore around and get a few more chests. But it's pretty smooth sailing so far, no issues. And of course, now you're starting to see the speed up in action. It's something I'm definitely going to utilize a lot. But weirdly enough, I think it was the kind of thing where once I started to get into dungeons, I really slowed it down, because you kind of need to constantly track what's going on in a battle to make sure like something silly isn't happening. And so ultimately, like when I'm exploring towns and stuff, or I'm trying to skip along dialogue, or I've already cleared an area out, like then the speed up is of course very useful. Or if I'm completely OP for an area and it just doesn't matter. But I actually didn't use speed up as much as I thought early on, because I just really needed to make sure I was seeing what was happening as much as I could. But that's the general idea. You can see Vaan and Penelo are very much safe, and we are going to move things along from here. So the first assignment that Vaan and Penelo have together is the whole Shadestone thing. Now, you've already seen me defeat the enemies in this area, so I'm not going to kind of dwell on this for too long. They are going to power up the stone successfully and move things along in the story. But you can see, even with that, we did take on a fair few encounters to do all of that, and we were still on level 2. So I think trying to grind for levels specifically early on, it still will take quite a while if we need to do it. And so I was hoping that, yes, I can get license points fairly fast, but leveling up is going to take a while. And so I was hoping that we didn't run into anything that was a particularly big roadblock early on. Otherwise, we'd be stuck here for quite some time if we needed to gain, say, like 5 or 10 levels very early on. And so with that, Penelo leaves already, and Vaan is back to being solo, and we find ourselves in the waterway trying to make our way towards the palace. So I was taking a look at Vaan's license board, and thankfully as a Shikari he already gains access to HP augments pretty quickly. And so that's generally the path I decided to go down. Instead of trying to find more weapons, like unlock more weapon slots at this point, I figured if I can fundamentally boost his HP a bit more quickly, I figured that would be quite helpful. He already has the ability to equip a Mage Masher like very quickly, and so I figured it's probably better to focus on getting more HP. Because obviously, there's kind of two things you need. There's three things you need, realistically. You need HP, obviously, to survive as long as you can, because healing in battle is going to be a huge problem, / pretty much impossible for especially this stage of the game. And so you need to stay alive for as long as possible. Then, of course, you need to deal damage as much as possible. And then, once you're out of battle, you need to be able to heal, because you're just not going to last very long. If you try to get through all of these dungeons without healing at all, at this stage of the game. So what you're seeing here is already I'm starting to kind of hang out in more of a kind of a claustrophobic dungeon type area, and these places you're a lot more likely to trigger encounters, and due to the length of these encounters, if you're not healing outside of battle, the chip damage that you're taking from these enemies is going to add up pretty quickly. So Vaan levels up there, which is nice. But he's basically taking pretty much one guaranteed hit every time, sometimes two. And even if they're taking like 5%, 10% of his HP every single encounter, across like a relatively long dungeon, you're just going to run out of HP very fast. So this was my kind of first test to see how long I could survive in these dungeons without basically getting any healing in. So one-on-one, we're defeating enemies pretty quick and pretty easily. But with the no healing thing in place here, I could already tell that this was going to be pretty difficult to pull off. So 5 damage there. And now it's running away from me, potentially drawing me into more trouble here. But there you go. Only took 5 damage there. But these dungeons can be pretty long, and they can have a lot of encounters, so it's definitely a kind of a dangerous way to try and proceed here. And so I didn't want to go looking for too much trouble, and kind of keep things moving along as best I can. But already I'm almost kind of down to half HP here. Yeah, no way through. And so, for example, up ahead here, you can see an example of something where it's going to be very difficult for me to try and avoid the encounter. And to get to the palace, I need to make it through this bit. So this is where I'm going to try to see if I can kind of just bypass a bit that's looking dangerous. I took a hit there. But in general, fleeing is not too bad if there is kind of an end in sight, if you know what I mean. Like, if you get yourself stuck somewhere, like, they will pursue you for quite some time. As you can see here, the stealing followed me for quite a while. If you don't, like, if you get yourself caught somewhere and you have multiple enemies following you, you might find yourself in a very difficult situation. So fleeing is obviously very useful, but it can prove very dangerous if you're not, if you're unlucky or you're not paying attention. So I'm already down to 60 HP here. If I didn't skip those encounters, I basically would have already been dead here, because he's solo. And for now, at least, we're not healing at all. So definitely a very risky way to play. But thankfully, these guys are neutral until you attack them, so that's nice. But already, I can't be taking too many more hits here. But I'm already very close. So the stealing, it comes from pretty far, these ones. I think the flyers probably naturally have more range for when they trigger encounters. So I took 2 hits there. Yeah, down to 42. I can barely survive like another 2 or 3 encounters at this stage without healing. But picking up some nice stuff from the chests. And so now I decide, okay, I'm on 42 HP here. I should probably try and get out of here and finish this bit. But you can see that stealing is on my case, and it's not leaving me alone. And they will get in attacks there, you see? So it's the kind of thing that can prove very dangerous. Like while you're fleeing, you'll continue to take damage as well. And it did not leave me alone here. You can see it's right there. And so you can see, like, when you have these narrow paths, you have a lot of encounters, and you're not healing, things are going to get incredibly dangerous. So already we're kind of riding our luck here. And you can see why ultimately, like, this whole like not healing at all thing was just not very sustainable. But for now, for our first kind of run through, we managed to make it through to the palace. Vaan is riding solo for now, but thankfully help is not too far away, as the leading man and Fran are in the house, and we will hopefully be meeting them soon. And so we continue through the palace, and thankfully, of course, being such an early stage of the game is being very generous with its save crystals, and we got one immediately upon starting here. So that's why I thought to myself, maybe there's a chance that the game actually puts in enough of these save crystals that there's a chance that you could kind of just fight your way through and flee your way through an area and still manage to kind of heal enough. But you'll see eventually as things go on, it just starts to get a little bit too much. And just relying on save crystals for healing was just proving to be a step too far for me. And so as I continue my way through the palace, I'll explain a little bit more about that as well. Basically, it did feel to me like eventually as I did more and more testing that maybe it is potentially theoretically possible to do this challenge without healing outside of battle as well. Even for like deep, more difficult dungeons where there's just a lot of encounters that you can't avoid. But it felt to me like the only way you could probably do it is by being increasingly more and more OP for an area. So obviously, like, if you level up, if you're like 10, 20, 30 levels above the average kind of level of an enemy in there, then there's a chance that basically fleeing your way through and only taking damage, like the chip damage that the enemies are giving you through a dungeon, you can probably make your way through, and you would only level when you know that you're in a safe spot. So if you're in a place where there's a save crystal nearby, and you can farm enemies for experience and LP, then you can basically just keep healing when you're near there, and it'll be totally fine. And I thought about it, and I was like, this is just like, it seems doable, and it would be cool to have people do that, like try that version as well. But for me at least, I still, it kind of goes against the kind of philosophy of how I want to play, where yes, it's attack only, but I feel like the idea of being that OP in order to avoid healing outside of battle, that's less interesting for me than trying to do it the way that I'm doing it, and just going through at something at least closer to the lowest level possible for a particular area or a particular boss or something like that. So that's why when it came to like that fork in the road, I decided once again, as I have been throughout these challenges, to go for the healing outside of battle. But I do think it might be possible if you're willing to put in the legwork to really grind up and be incredibly powerful for these bits, and basically kind of just flee a lot of the encounters and only deal with the build-up damage that you take through a dungeon. But before long, thankfully, we find ourselves in the treasure room, and Balthea and Fran make their appearance and join the party. So thankfully, it doesn't take that long to have like a 3-party member team, which was a big relief. And I felt like already if Vaan could generally get through by himself, and still as of this point I hadn't needed to heal at all yet outside of battle, I figured with 3 characters, maybe there's an even better chance of making it through without needing to heal as well. And so of course, once Balthea and Fran join, we have to already once again make a decision. They join at level 4, and we need to decide on jobs for these guys. Now, for Balthea, I kind of wanted him to be the leading man of this playthrough. I wanted to try and control him as much as I could, and to have him be kind of in the front line. And as such, I wanted to give him one of the roles that I considered potentially the most useful in a challenge like this. And so I made him a machinist. Machinists primarily operate with guns in this game, and well, that guy literally, his kind of iconic opening shot is him with a gun slung over his shoulder. I feel like Balthea is a bit of a gunslinger anyway, and so I felt like not only would it suit him, but it's also a potentially very useful job for this particular type of challenge. So for the machinist, they obviously have long range because they have guns. We can also use hand bombs with them if they're ever particularly useful for a boss or an area. And they also have the ability to use measures. And measures are something I don't really think I use much in my first ever playthrough. But measures are interesting because they give us, once again, more options when it comes to elemental / status type damage. And so that's going to be definitely useful for us as we continue forward. And another benefit of the Machinist and guns in general is that their power is not based on the stats of the user. So we don't need to particularly farm for good stats as a Machinist and as a gun user. It might be the case that there might be a part of the game where we can gain access to a very powerful gun kind of ahead of schedule, and we can maintain being low level and still have a very powerful damage output because we have a very powerful gun to be used for this particular character. And so that seemed like it would also be very useful for me moving forward. Machinist is another one that has access to 3 swiftnesses, and that obviously increases my damage output, the DPS possibilities. And so it seemed to me a bit of a no-brainer to have a Machinist in the lineup, and I thought Balthier can fill that role for this particular challenge, and hopefully it will be a decent choice moving forward. So his one was set, and for Fran, I decided for more ranged attack, and I went for her as an archer. Again, a lot of the benefits here are obvious. They have elemental arrows as well. They can have decent HP if you augment them that way. And in the future, if I decide to start using items outside of battle, which in retrospect actually did, then they have access to things like Remedy Law 3, which can potentially get me out of a lot of status trouble outside of fights. And so for now, that is the team. We have Varn as a Shikari, we have Balthier as our Machinist Gunslinger, and we have Fran as an Archer. So that's what we've gone for in this early stage, and we'll see if this trio can make it out of the Garam Scythe Waterway and continue the journey. So the final thing I will do for this particular introductory episode is talk more about gambits, and this was the first part of the run where I decided to start experimenting around with gambits a little more. So as I said before, what I didn't want my party to do was to basically start attacking things indiscriminately, like without me basically either instigating a battle or deciding on which foe to attack. My general idea here was to try and have a ranged attacker like Balthier be the leading man, and I thought maybe because he is a ranged attacker, he can instigate attacks earlier than, say, a Shikari, so we can kind of start the fight a little bit more quickly and make a decision about whether to fight an enemy from a greater distance. This might not be the case. It might kind of be the same range to instigate a fight for all of the jobs, but it's not something that I particularly knew about or checked. It was just intuition. So I decided to try to do that, have my party leader who has long range kind of instigate which fights I want to instigate, and then once we start fighting, I wanted to try and focus all of my attacks on the same enemy and to try and take enemies out one at a time, instead of having a situation where, say, 3 characters fight 2 different enemies at the same time, or 3 different enemies at the same time. So in terms of the gambits, you can set that up. You can set it so that your party members, they only target the party leader's target. And so obviously that stops them from fighting anything that you don't want them to fight. And so at least early on, that's what I wanted to do. Later on, obviously, I'll start to add a few more little modifications and that kind of thing. But for now, at least, I tried to disable anything like nearest visible, just in case there was any kind of gaps in my kind of party leader targeting that made them instigate fights or attack enemies I didn't want them to attack. So for now, at least in terms of gambits, I kept it very simple. I have my party leader who I would manually instigate fights with and manually target and attack enemies with, and then I have my 2 other party members who would use their gambit to basically continue attacking whatever I had chosen to fight. And so this was basically the setup that I would go with for the early part of my playthrough. And so what you'll see for the rest of this particular bit as I start to sign off for this first episode, because I don't want to make it like 2 hours long, is the party beginning to try and make their way out of the Garam Scythe Waterway. Now this area is already quite long. Like you saw in the map there, there's a long way to go round here. And at this point, I was still trying to do it without doing any healing outside of battle. And you'll generally see how that's going to go for us as I start to kind of experiment around here with kind of different commands and how this is all going to work. It's a slow start. You'll see things start to come together a little more as it continues. So if you don't have any gambits equipped here, you can see that the party is not really doing anything. and that's obviously by design. And so now we're going to flip the gambits on to see the difference here. I just kind of wanted to see what they do, where do they move, where do they stand, because obviously what your non-attacking, like non-party leader members are doing is going to be quite important in this challenge. And so we're kind of seeing Balthier try to draw away enemies and try to avoid encounters. And it's something that I will continue to generally experiment with as the challenge goes on. So already I kind of described to you what my kind of theoretical approach was, but then I quickly realized it might not be the best idea, because it would mean that my long-range attacker, who's supposed to be kind of far away from the action and taking less damage, would be the one who is immediately targeted by the enemy. And so Balthier was already taking like more hits than I wanted him to. And so it started to turn into a little bit more of a maybe it's better to use Varn as the party leader here, even though I kind of didn't want to. Have him basically take the aggro from the enemy and get right in their face and start attacking, and then Balthier and Fran would be the ones to basically continue to attack from range and really not take any damage, ideally, against these small random encounters. And after a few encounters, that was already looking like it was starting to work pretty well. Only problem being, obviously, as time goes on, Varn is the only one taking damage, and he's dealing with all of the attacks. And so keeping him alive would prove to be increasingly difficult the deeper we got into the waterway. Because you can see these bats especially, they have pretty good range, and unless you're trying to flee them all the time, they're going to instigate fights with you even if you don't want to. And they follow you for quite a long time, as you've already seen as well. So if you get into the game of trying to run away from the bats, they might follow you long enough to come up against another bunch of enemies, and you could get ganged up on very quickly. And if there's one thing I wanted to avoid, it was having, obviously, like a whole pack of enemies attacking me at the same time. So we're generally moving okay here, but it's potentially treacherous because already we've lost about a third of our HP, and we're definitely not a third of the way through the encounter. So you can see me here just trying to bait the encounter. Like, I'm trying to see if I can instigate something, then run away from them, and then in the 3 or 4 seconds it would take them to actually attack me, maybe I could kill them with my long-range attackers before that. So you're seeing that in action here. But I still took a hit there. So, yeah. I mean, it doesn't work very well. Like, I tried to give Balthier and Fran a lot of time there to try and get their hits in and kill the enemy. If they're strong enough to one-hit KO everything, I think it works much better, depending on where you are on the map. So I'm trying again here. But, I mean, we're taking, like, 5 or 6 hits here collectively. And that's just too much. So if every enemy is landing a hit on Varn here for, like, 10-15 damage, we just don't have the endurance to get through this entire Garensythe waterway without healing Varn here. And so here's another encounter. I'm still trying the same thing here. The trouble here tends to be that you can see the delay from where Varn has targeted an enemy and his attack bar started filling to when Balthier and Fran also join in here. And this is where things started to go wrong in the kind of no healing style that I was trying to do. So we have a Gigantoad literally blocking the way here, and so you have to try and flee your way through, or you have to instigate an encounter. And so what I did, I tried to get the ceiling out of the way first. I took a hit, another 17 damage there. And they're withstanding a lot of hits. Like, this isn't like 2-hit KO or 3-hit KO here. It's like 5 or 6 hits every time. And so I'm down to 59 HP, and we need to take out a Gigantoad. And so already here, I needed to kind of switch my party leader, because I thought I need someone else to take the aggro, otherwise Varn's going to die. So Balthier takes the lead here. Nice critical there. But even with the critical, it's taking us a whole bunch of hits here, and Varn still got killed. And so that's the kind of thing that you're going to start to see. The long-range attackers are obviously going to keep their distance, but Varn, as a Shikari, is going to get all up in their face. And even if an enemy starts the encounter with, you know, the aggression on them, it's probably going to switch over to Varn pretty quickly. And so Varn needs to up his HP pretty fast, because he's going to take a lot of damage here. He's going to be, like, you know, effectively a bit of a whipping boy in this challenge. So that's something I needed to definitely watch out for. And so as of this point, I've lost Varn, and I still have a lot to do here to get to the end of the Garamside Waterway and make it back towards Lowtown. And so this was already me thinking that I've probably already died here. I won't be able to recover from this because there's bats everywhere that are not going to let you get away. And in general, there's still quite a lot of ground to cover. And both Fran and Balthea are going to be taking a lot of hits here. And these encounters are going to take even longer. So you can see the whole trying to do it without healing outside of battle. It was looking like a pretty futile endeavor here. I mean, we definitely had loads of potions at this stage. It wasn't that we couldn't heal because we had a lack of resources or anything. But this was just me trying to see how far I could push it and whether I could get away with it. So this is an example here. This is a dead end. I have the frog chasing me, but I've ended up in a dead end. And so I kind of have to fight now. And so I think you can see where this is going. I've got some criticals in, but it's not going to be enough. It's doing a lot of damage to me. 19. And so let's see if Balthea can survive by himself. Probably not for very long. 21 damage. 26 damage. And it's attacking quickly. Like you're seeing, it's almost getting 2 for 1 here. 3 for 1. And he blocked it. Amazingly clutch there from Balthea, but not clutch enough. And there you go. There's my first game over. And so, yeah, that's where I'm going to wrap up this first episode. You can see trying to do it that way is not looking like a great idea. And so, as I said, you have two choices. Either you hang out near the save crystal and you go on some big power leveling thing to be able to blast through these guys, or you bite the bullet and you start to basically use healing items outside of battle. Now for me, because I had an autosave, I decided to try it one more time and see if I could do it without getting myself kind of into a dead end or getting myself into trouble. And so I still kind of kept up the whole not healing outside of battle for a little bit longer, but it's not something in hindsight that I recommend. I did eventually give it up after another hour or two, but for now at least I was kind of just trying my best to see if I could do it and finish things off. So I will start to wrap this episode up. You can see that there's already a lot of interesting things going on, and there will definitely be some cool sections to come. And so I hope you guys have enjoyed this setup and premise. We are going to be digging much deeper and moving the story along more swiftly in the next episode. But as always, for these ones, I think it's worth talking about all of these factors and setting things up for the series ahead. So yes, we have Varn, Balthea and Fran, and they will be our party for a while, which is fine by me. And we will try to make it out of the Garamside Waterway back to Lowtown and continue the story in the next session. So as always, thank you for your support, and I hope you have enjoyed this first episode. Looking forward to bringing you guys more from this. And as always, there will be early access on Patreon for anyone who wants to go above and beyond to support these series and help me keep being able to make them regardless of the views that they get. There are, of course, additional perks like the exclusive Zodiac Age Brain Trust Discord server if you want to pledge at that level. But if you're just here as a viewer and you're eagerly anticipating the next episode, as always, it will be a fortnightly series, and I'll be bringing you guys the next part in the next 2 weeks, and we'll be continuing to hopefully make progress in this challenge, and I'll continue to work on it behind the scenes and try to get as much of it done as possible. So thank you for watching. Hope you have enjoyed this first video. If you haven't already, please remember to drop a like, and I will see you for the next part very soon. Take care.